Hey class, I'll be teaching about going out to war. It's the beginning of Perek Chet. So this part of the Torah is describing going out to war, basically, and what happens when we go out to war, and who is exempt from going to war. That's basically the 9 psukim in a short summary, and now we'll go deeper. So it begins, Ki tetzei milchama levecha v'ra'ita sus v'arechev am rav mimcha lo tira mehem ki Hashem elokecha imach hamalcha me'eretz Mitzrayim. So the first question is, Ki tetzei milchama, what kind of war are we going to? So that was my first question, and it seems from the article that I read that this type of war is a defensive war, but the people are actually, Bnei Israel are actually conquering land. But it's viewed as a defensive war because they're not going to conquer people. They're going to conquer land in terms of military use. So they're just going to conquer a bit of land next to them so they can be more safe. That's the type of war that it seems it's talking about. So on this pasuk, Rashi talks about, of course, how does this connect to the topic before? The psukim immediately before, are talking about Eid Zomem, which seems like it doesn't really connect to this topic of war. How does false witnesses in court have anything to do with going out to war? So Rashi answers that when an Eid Zomem comes onto a person and he tries to cause him harm, the last pasuk in Perek Yutet says, "V'lo tachos eincha nefesh b'nefesh, ayin b'ayin, shein b'shein, yad b'yad, regel b'regel." So we give to that Eid Zomem what he tried to do to his fellow person who he's trying to cause to get a punishment. Therefore, we give him whatever he tried to cause. So if he tried to cause death, we give him death, as the pasuk says, but that's not actually true. Ayin ba'ayin, if you tried to cut out his eye, you cut out his eye. Shein b'shein, yad b'yad, regel b'regel. So basically, you cause harm to his body, whatever he tried to do to his fellow person. So by handicapping this person, you are basically releasing them from war, because a handicapped person cannot be in war. That is why these two topics are put together. Rashi also gives another answer, that it's as if to say to the leaders of Bnei Israel that if you act nobly in court, which this Eid Zomem did not, so it's telling Bnei Israel to act nobly in court, and only if you act nobly in court you will win the war. But if you don't, you will lose. And we see this from David, where it says, Asiti mishpat tzedek bal tanichani laoskai. So there's a pasuk with David that says, I judged fairly, so help me with whatever I need. Rashi goes further in this pasuk and he says, Alo vecha. So you're going in a war against your enemies. Why does it have to point out enemies? Isn't that obvious? So Rashi says that Alo vecha is meant to tell Bnei Israel that not to have pity on their enemies, because they won't pity you. Meaning, if in a type of civil war where you're fighting against your brothers and you guys are family and something happens that you disagree on, and you start to fight, they'll actually pity you. But on the other hand, your enemy is never going to pity you, so you can't pity them. Another question Rashi has on this pasuk is sus varechev. It says it in the singular form. So why is that? Rashi answers that it's because when you go out to war, you see sus varechev, you see all of the horses and chariots, you see them as one person. And it's one nation you're going out to fight against. So that's why it's written in the singular form. Lastly, on this pasuk, Rashi comments on the words Am Rav Mimcha. And specifically, the pasuk says, Vera'ita sus varechev Am Rav Mimcha. So you see a nation that is greater than you. So Rashi points out that in Bnei Israel's eyes, the nation might be greater than you, but in Hashem's eyes, it most certainly is not. Okay, so now pasuk bet. V'amar lehem shema v'haya kekarabchem el hamilchama v'nigash hakohen v'diber la'am. So when you come to war, the Kohen will come and he will speak to the nation. So Rashi asks on this pasuk, "V'nigash hakohen," the kohen comes. So Rashi says, "Hamashoach lekach, v'hu hanikra mashoach hamilchama." So Rashi says the kohen is the anointed one, so to speak, and he is called the anointed one of war, appointer of war. So the kohen is the man who speaks to the Am and is destined to talk to them before war. Okay, pasuk gimel. Ve'amar lehem Shema Yisrael atem krevim hayom lamilchama al oivechem al yerach levchem al tiru ve'al tachbazu ve'al tartzu mipneihem. So this pasuk is talking about what the Kohen says. So he says to Bnei Israel, listen, Bnei Israel, today you're going to war against your enemies. Don't al yerach levchem, don't be scared. Al tiru ve'al tachbazu ve'al tartzu mipneihem. So he basically says in 4 different words, don't be scared of the other nation. So Rashi asks many questions on this pasuk. First, he asks on Shema Yisrael. So what is Shema Yisrael? That reminds us of the Shema we say. So Rashi says that in order to save yourself, you only need to say Shema Yisrael. So this phrase Shema Yisrael can save you, is basically your link to God, and God will save you if you say Shema Yisrael. Then Rashi talks about al oivechem. It says al oivechem again. So what is this talking about? So again, the Kohen is reminding Bnei Israel that this war is not like a civil war, that the nation you are fighting against will have zero pity. If they win, they will take everything you have. They will destroy your towns. They will take all your food, all your cattle, and it will be terrible because they have no pity on you. Therefore, you can't have pity on them. Lastly, on this pasuk, Rashi asks on al yerach levchem al tiru ve'al tachbazu ve'al tartzu. So why does it give these four different words for don't be scared? Why does it need 4? Why couldn't it just say al yerach levchem al tiru or whatever? So Rashi answers that in those times in war, the enemies Bnei Israel would fight against had 4 different tactics they would use. So al yerach levavchem is telling Bnei Israel, don't be scared from their horses. Al tiru is talking about from their shields. Al tachbazu is talking about from the horn blasts, which would scare other nations. Al tartzu is mekil hatzvacha. On this exact topic, the Rabad also comments, and he says al tiru in your heart, so don't be scared in your heart. Al tachbazu, don't run away. Al tartzu, in your actions. So basically he says in your heart, don't be scared. Don't be scared to the point that you'll run away, and don't be scared that it'll affect your actions. Okay, on to pasuk Daled. Ki Hashem Elokechem haolech imachem lilachem lachem imo veichem loshia etchem. Because God is God, your Lord, haolech imachem, who walks with you, lilachem lachem, to fight with you, imo veichem loshia etchem. So God will always be there in war. He will protect you. He will fight with you, and He will save you. So on this pasuk, Rashi asks, Ki Hashem Elokechem. So the word, he basically asked on the word ki, because. So he comments on this pasuk that most nations come with their strongest warriors, and that's who they are coming to war with. With the Plishtim, it was Goliath, meaning they basically viewed him as their war. So once he fell, all of Plishtim ran away because that was basically their god. So with him, they all fled. With Bnei Israel, God is their leader who in war. So and God never falls because He's not a physical character. So Bnei Israel will never fall, so to speak. Okay. On to pasuk Hey. So v'dibru hashotrim el ha'am lemar mi ha'ish asher bana bait chadash v'lo chanacho yilech v'yashol beito pen yamut b'melchama v'ish acher yichanechenu. So the shotrim come and they talk to the nation now, and they're going to exempt certain groups of people. So the first group is a person who bana bait chadash, who built a new house, v'lo chanacho, and he didn't live in it, I guess. So Yelech v'yashol v'beito, he should go back. Pen yamut b'milchama v'yishacher yichanechenu. So lest he die in war, and someone else will go and live in it. So Rashi on this pasuk v'lo chanacho, he says, and he hasn't lived there. Chanach, the root chanach means to begin, and that's chanacho. So he has not yet began to live there, and that is why he goes home, because Rashi comments ish acher yichanechenu, he doesn't want someone else to live there. And Rashi says it's an issue of being distraught. It will torment his soul. So if someone else, it's as if to say this house is so important to him that if someone else reaps the benefit of the house, it will torture this man's soul when he dies. So on this pasuk, Rashbam basically gives an overview of the whole parsha of all of the different exemptions. Yelech v'yashol v'beito. So he says the three types of soldiers who are exempted and allowed to leave are all because their mind is not in war. If we'll get to the next two exemptions are for a wife and for a new vineyard. So all of these types of people, a new vineyard, a new wife, and a new house, these people are concentrated on what's going on at home, and their mind won't be with war. Therefore, we exempt them from war. So these are the three sort of beginning groups who are exempted from war. And then lastly, as we'll get to in a minute, the last group who are exempted are people who are just scared, and for no reason, but they are too scared to fight, and that is why they are exempt. So all of these people are people who are, their emotions take the better of them, either because they have something going on at home or because they're just afraid. Therefore, they are all exempt from war, and they can go home. So we'll move on to pasuk vav now. Umiyayish asher nata karem v'lo chilalo yelech v'yashol v'beito pen yamut b'milchama v'ish acher yichalenu. So pasuk vav is the next category. It is asher nata karem, someone who plants a vineyard, v'lo chilalo, but he hasn't harvested it yet. So I believe this is talking about the first couple years where you're not allowed to use the fruits. So therefore, this man cannot use those fruits, and he has. So it's in the first couple years of his vineyard, and therefore we don't make him come to war because he's emotionally attached to this vineyard. So Rashi on this pasuk says chililo, as I said, shana haravi'i sheyachol le'achol ha'taperot b'Yerushalayim. So chililo refers to the fourth year when you are first allowed to use the fruits. Which is only in Yerushalayim, but that is the first year you can use them. So lo hala lo holech lemilchama ki lo yishma la kohen v'yamut. So this man doesn't go to war because he won't listen to the kohen, because he's emotionally attached to his vineyard and he can't concentrate on war. Okay, on to the next pasuk. Umi ha'ish asher eras isha v'lo lekacha yelech v'yashol v'beito pen yamut milchama v'ish acher yikachena. So this is the third and final group, which is a man who has a woman and a new wife, and he's engaged her but hasn't married her. He goes home because he doesn't want someone else to take her if he dies, and he's emotionally attached. So lastly, on to Chet v'yasu hashotrim ledaber la'am v'amru miyayish hayareh v'rach alibav yelech v'yashol v'beito v'lo yimas elabav achiv ki obabo. So the last group the Shotrim say is a man who is scared and his heart is not with him. He should go home, and he will not convince others. He will not negatively affect the hearts of others like he is negatively affected. So this talks about how fear can spread, and if someone is afraid, they are exempt because we don't want fear to spread throughout the nation. Okay, so Rashi asks here, why is it talking about Shotrim? So Hashofet Mosif al Divrei HaKohanim at Pasuk Chet. So here the Shotrim are adding adding what they said before about these three topics. So they're adding onto it. Hayareh v'rach halevav. So they're adding onto it. So now we're talking about Hayareh v'rach halevav. What does that specifically mean? So there are two two rabbis comment on it, as Rashi quotes. So Rabbi Akiva says, "Shelo yachol lirot cherev shlufa." So he says, "Hayarei v'rach alevav" is referring to a man who cannot see a sword. So there are people who are incredibly afraid of swords, I guess, and once they see it, they won't be able to react. So it's a terrible thing in war. Therefore, it's a hazard and won't help. So we exempt him from war. Rabbi Yossi Hagalili says, those who are afraid from their sins. So this category is someone who is exempt from war because they are afraid of their sins and they are afraid to go to war because they think God will punish them in war by killing them. So he says this is the reason that the three other categories are put into place, because someone who is going home would be embarrassed if everyone knew that they're home because they sinned, and they would start judging them, because the only people who would be exempt would be the ones who sinned, and that would cause a lot of people to know who sinned. So therefore we send a lot of other people home with the vineyard, wife, and house. Therefore no one knows if you sinned or if you have a new house or whatever. So the last pasuk, so here we talk about when the shotrim are done talking, they appoint military leaders to be on top of the Am, to help them in war. So that pasuk just basically sums up the war. And now we'll move on to those were the 9 psukim. So now we're going to move on to the article. So the article is the Israel Koshitsky Virtual Beit Midrash on Parshat Shoftim by Rav Michael Haddon. So this article is describing all of Perek Chet that we just read, namely going out to war. The war described here is a milchama reshut, where the war is over resources, the land, not lives. As I said before, it's not a war where you're conquering a nation; you're just conquering land, and it's allowed by the Torah, milchamat reshut. So the main topic described in the Torah regarding the wars is exemptions, as we talked about. There are 4 types of soldiers who are exempt from war: a man with a new vineyard, a new house, or a new wife, and a man who is scared for his life and sent home. So we discussed this, and now Rabbi Hatton asked, why are these 4 types specifically sent home? A pretty good question. So the Rambam, Ramban, and Ibn Ezra all have similar arguments. We went over the Rashbam. That's not here, but we went over the Rambam. So the Rashbam also kind of agrees here. So all of these people answer that. They answer a very simple and rational answer. All of these people are sent home because of their lack of composure. So we discussed this, that everyone who has all of these things at home, like a new wife, a new vineyard, or a new house, their thoughts are with what's happening at home, and they won't be focused on war, and it'll be a problem and hard to deal with. So we just let them go home because they're probably just going to get killed. So even the coward, who one might think is exempt because he might convince others to be afraid and spread panic, as the pasuk says, is actually let go because he is too preoccupied by fear to fight. So it's not actually that he's going to cause others to be afraid and be harmful to the war as a whole, but we're just worried about him as an individual being too scared to fight. So the reason for the 4 types of soldiers' exemptions is, as the Rambam says, because his heart is upon his home, his vineyard, and his wife, and he will therefore flee. So we just let him go because we know his mind is elsewhere, and he's just going to go anyways. So Rashi gives a very different interpretation. Rashi states that the reason the soldier is exempt is because if he died and someone else took his wife, vineyard, or house, it would torture the soul, as we discussed. So what Rashi infers with his commentary is not that it will torture the man's soul, but it will torture the souls of everyone in the community. So this is the inference from Rashi. We read Rashi, and it seemed like a very simple answer, that it will torture his soul. So Rabbi Hatton wants to go deeper into this and really understand, what does torturing his soul mean. So not torture his soul, torture the soul, is what Rashi said. So what is that exactly? So Rabbi Hatton he basically says that when any soldier dies in battle, it is tragic and the community feels the pain of the death. So this is true today. Anyone who is killed, the community feels that death. But when there is this young and coming man who is basically, you see him at the top of his life, just starting to get into the world. He finally has his vineyard, or he finally built a house, finally got married. He's basically at the high point of his life. He's going up, and he has so much potential in life, and then he goes to war and is killed. So that would be even more tragic than just, not to say that life isn't valuable, but this man's life seems more valuable, and the community will feel this death and will be more distraught. Therefore, these soldiers are exempt because we don't want the community at home to become distraught over this man's life and will cease to function and still thrive and flourish during a time of war. Therefore, what Rashi is basically saying that during war, we are worrying about the people at home, the community at home. We're not only worrying about war. Therefore, these people who are exempt are sent home because they will keep the community going, they will continue to advance their own lives, and they will help the community thrive and flourish. So these three cases of a wife, a vineyard, and a new house, all are talking about this kind of person who goes back home because the community will be distraught over his death. That's why he goes home. The fourth case of someone who is just afraid is sent home, most likely, but Rashi explains it as the pshat of the pasuk, that he's going to convince others to be scared, so we send him home. So at the end of the article, Rabbi Haddon just proves that building houses, new wives, and vineyards are the way to prosper in a community. By Yirmiyahu, when Yirmiyahu talks about the Galut with Bnei Israel who are going to Bavel, he says, when you're there, you will be there a while, so you should build houses, you should get married, and you should build vineyards and settle down because you'll be there a while, and that is the key to a flourishing community. Therefore, in a wartime, we want the community to still prosper, and therefore we allow some people to stay home and continue running their houses, running their vineyards, and marrying. All right, that's it.